Welcome to the Success Story Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Clary. On this podcast, I have candid interviews with execs, celebrities, politicians, and other notable figures, all who have achieved success through both wins and losses, to learn more about their life, their ideas, and their insights. I sit down with leaders and mentors and unpack their story to help pass those lessons on to others through both experiences and tactical strategy for business professionals, entrepreneurs, and everyone in between. Without further ado, another episode of the Success Story Podcast. All right. Thanks again for joining me. Today, I am sitting down with Alex Amancio, who is the CEO of Reflector Entertainment. Now, Reflector is a transmedia company with an exciting new IP, Unknown 9, which was previously teased out at New York's Comic-Con and is now set to launch this fall with the announcement of a new AAA game. CEO and creator Alex previously was a creative director behind the hit Assassin's Creed franchise and is set to revolutionize the way the fans and audiences experience storytelling with this out-of-the-box, technically innovative approach to their new IP. Their content is built on multiple platforms simultaneously to build out Storyworlds. I'm going to understand a little bit more about what that is, and allowing the company to tell richer, deeper stories that connect with fans everywhere through television, mobile, game, console, novels, comics, digital content, etc. And all these pieces support each other. So this is what Alex is working on now. He has an incredible career before he started working with, obviously, CEO of Reflector and with Unknown. So Alex, I really, really appreciate you coming on. I'm really excited to understand your story because everything you're doing is so impressive, but I don't come from the world of creative. So I want to understand a little bit more about your career and how you got into what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the cool thing about careers in the creative world is that the paths are very different, and it's almost the kind of like everybody that I know has a different journey. It's like almost like every single journey is completely unplottable until you've done it, right? And then in hindsight, you look at it, oh my God, it all makes sense. But when you're doing it, it just seems like the right decision at the right time. So my career, I actually started in school. I was going to study science. I was always going to be a science person. I love physics, and art was something that was just part of my life ever since I was a kid. I drew. I sang in a band. I played instruments. So I always figured that was going to be sort of my hobby. But then, at one point, I see this movie Jurassic Park, and I saw them do things that like bring back to life things that had been dead for millions of years in a way that, I mean, it complete realism. And I foresaw in that where we were heading with entertainment, with games and with film. And like we could build worlds, the worlds that we could only imagine, like even a few years back. Now we could start building them. So I did a complete 180. I quit school. The only way I could learn to do 3D was there was these private schools that we had two in Montreal. I think back then you can do it through the normal school program. So I enrolled in that. I did an 8-month crash course in 3D. And then started working. There was like today, the video game industry in Montreal is huge, but back then there was maybe only Ubisoft, and so I didn't get picked as the initial wave of employees. So I worked for about almost 4 years in visual simulation. I did simulators for ship simulators and aircraft, helicopter simulators. Learned all about how to do a lot with very little, and then at one point I got an entry, essentially an opportunity to go into a video game company. It was this small video game studio in Montreal that was French owned. And I worked there for about 4 years. And we did little games that probably nobody ever heard about. I did a game called Tennis Master Series. I think it was the 2003 or 4. And then I did a game called Memoric Knight's Apprentice, which was a platformer. But we were doing these things with about from a tenth to a fifth of the budget that other companies were doing them. So we had to come up with innovative ways of actually getting it done. So even if the games that we did were small games that nobody knows about, this was the best possible school to learn how to work in the industry, because if you wanted something done and nobody else was assigned to do it, it's either you do it or it doesn't get done. So it allowed me. I was lead artist, but I also play the role of the art director, of the technical art director. So at one point, on Memrick, the writer or the lead designer was also writing. He quit to join Ubisoft, and I ended up writing it. I had done some writing, creative writing in my spare time. So it really allowed me to test my, put out my creative feelers and to test the limits of what I could do. So after that, the company closed down, and we were bought by Ubisoft. They didn't buy the IP. They just bought literally the furniture and the employees, literally. So I found myself from this small company where we were, I guess, 80 people working on 2 or 3 games sometimes, super small teams, to a huge company where I think we had about like that number just in my game. And my game was Far Cry 2.
I remember Far Cry. That was these are starting to become bigger names, I guess, second you move over to Ubisoft, because that was a huge game.
Yeah, and I mean, the first one had come out. It was this relatively obscure game made by a German studio called Crytek, and Ubisoft bought the game engine and bought the IP with it. And our first mandate was, how do you turn this into an IP that will, like, be more successful and bigger? So the first one was all about like mutant monsters and an island, tropical island. So we dropped those and we made it about human against nature, like the wrong place, a guy that's the wrong place, wrong time, but it's the right person to be in that wrong place. So it was all about a fish out of water, and we envisioned this IP being always with a different protagonist. But the one thing that was common to everything was the fact that you had this character that was dropped into, from their perspective, was an alien world, and they had to use their wits to survive against these bad guys. And the executive producer back then gave me a challenge. He said, "Look, I want this game." He showed me what Crysis was now working on, and he shows me this game that would become a game called Crysis. The company Crytek did it, and he shows me this game and goes, "I want Far Cry 2 to look as good as that." And I looked at the screen. I'm like, "But that's running on a $5,000, $6,000 computer, and we have to run on a $300 Xbox." So, but I guess because I was young and a little naive, I accepted the challenge, and I spent the next 3 years trying to figure out how do you reinvent the way that you create art assets for video game in a way that you essentially circumvent the flaws of consoles, which back then were memory. You didn't have enough memory. Like these big computers had these amazing graphic cards with a lot of RAM, whereas you were limited in an Xbox or PlayStation. So what the advantage we had in the consoles is we had a lot of processing power. So I envisioned this way of creating, rather than using high resolution pictures to sort of create the surfaces for the game, which is the traditional way of doing it, I instead try to figure out, how do we simulate surfaces? So by using things like fractals and like small tileable textures, but that you stack and then blend between one and the other, and trying to reproduce actual surfaces rather than trying to map them with big pictures. And the added benefit to this was that it made assets be a lot more flexible. We could essentially have them accumulate dirt over time. We could have them rust, so they felt more alive. We could burn them and have them actually literally turn to ash. So it made for a game that not only, I think, looked great at the time, but also that was probably the most dynamic and immersive open world that had ever been done back then. You could burn it, like fire propagation through wind, and the vegetation was all dynamic. You could literally shoot branches, and if you stayed there long enough watching, you could see the branch grow back. So everything was procedural. Everything was so. I was I felt very proud of that, especially because for the first 2.5 years, people thought it was nuts. Because before all the tech was ready and everything was ready, it didn't look very good. But I was like, no, trust me, it'll work. This is going to work. And luckily, I guess I was lucky. It worked out, and it turned out really great. It bought me a lot of capital within the company. So what I said is, well, as art director, and because after the game, like Autodesk had me, which they're the makers of the 3D software that we used, they had me tour the world. They invited me to Japan. I did conferences on this new technique for creating assets. So after having done that, I figured, well, there's very like I couldn't see how I could sort of top that, at least in the short term, as an art director. So I asked Ubisoft, well, I'd like to evolve towards creative direction, and they said, but like we really like you as an art director. You just did Far Cry 2, and like, yeah, I understand, but I think I have something to bring in terms of creative direction. So they said, okay, look. This is I really appreciated this the fact that they actually went for this, but they said, look, we'll give you a room. They converted a big meeting room into sort of a private little lab, and they gave me 2 designers, some programmers, and they said, you know what, pitch us a game, come up with something, and we'll see what you can do as creative director. And I said, okay. So they gave me 3 months. I came back with 5 pitches. And I think we had 3 prototypes. One was actually AR, an augmented reality Assassin's Creed that you could play on the table. One was, I think, a platformer. The other one was a pirate game. Anyways, there was a bunch of different concepts. And I pitched them to the various executive producers at Ubisoft. And one, I think, saw potential in me. And he said, look, the 5 games that you just pitched, I think we should make all 5 of them. But I mean, it's just not going to happen because we can't start those many new IPs. And says, I certainly don't have the power to start a new IP in this company. You'd have to get a green light from like very top. That being said, I think you could bring something to this to my brand that I manage, which is sort of nascent. They had done a couple of games, which was Assassin's Creed. And he said, look, I want you to do the biggest, most ambitious one that we've ever done. I wanted to sort of like break new ground. I wanted to be the next generation. But before we do that, we sort of have a little problem. Like, okay, I'm listening. And he goes, well, we sort of, we're working on AC3, but we sort of need to release an Assassin's Creed game this year. And I went like, what do you mean this year? Like 11 months from now? And he goes, yeah. And we don't really have a team because the team that's made the previous ones, they're burnt out. They're much needed rest. So we're going to have to create a new team, and you'd be the creative director, and then we get a producer who hasn't shipped an Assassin's Creed game yet either. And maybe you guys meet. If you guys get along well, we can get this started. And
they keep giving you all the easy jobs, eh?
Well, probably because I was young and very naive. I said, sure, like challenge accepted. I like hard missions. And so we essentially we formed the team, and we, from beginning to end, we shipped Assassin's Creed Revelations in 10 months, which is the record for I think for a full-size Assassin's Creed game. And we ended up. It went so smoothly. I think that the stars must have been aligned because the team that we put together was, I think, one of the best teams that I've certainly ever worked with my entire career. So we shipped that, and then the executive producer said, well, you know that pirate game that you pitched, that was a pretty cool idea. You think we can sort of make an Assassin's Creed game with that? I'm like, yeah, for sure. So I essentially started the conception of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which was then called Golden Age, and I got it greenlit by upper management, and then afterwards I went on to the big one that I was supposed to do originally, which they had sort of started, but it was a little bit lacking direction. It was lacking a creative director. So my Revelations team continued on Black Flag, and I went on to pick up Unity to ship that game, because that was sort of the big priority for the company. It was a big investment. It was their next generation Assassin's Creed. So it was probably, well, certainly back then it was the most ambitious. It was huge. We reconstructed Paris in its full splendor, but Paris as it was before it was redone by Napoleon III and an architect called Haussmann. So we did the medieval Paris that you can't see today. Unless you go to the center island, Ile de la Cité, you still can see that old Paris, but that's pretty much it. The rest of Paris was beautified and with those big buildings that you now know. And we ended up breaking a lot of ground, like first sort of co-op Assassin's Creed game, first full-sized city where you could go into interiors as well. Before you needed loading, you couldn't sort of go into houses because they were actually too small. They weren't at scale. They were about a third too small. And we were able to actually have crowds of up to 10,000 NPCs on screen, which was probably still is, I think, the record in the game for a fully realized crowd. So we ended up breaking a lot of technical ground on that game. It was very, very ambitious production. And then as I was working, like throughout my career as creative director, I really started seeing and this started with Revelations, I started seeing that what we were working on, what we were building, it was more than video games. I think that we were stuck in the medium, but in reality, we were building a modern mythology. We were building a mirror to society. We were building these new characters and these new factions that sort of represented currents that humanity was sort of going through, which I think is probably what entertainment does best. It sort of provides society with a mirror. Yeah. And I felt that we were expanding this story across a lot of different media, like comic books. With Revelations, we actually did a pilot for an animated show that we actually released the pilot, but we never pursued the show. But we were doing spin-offs, novels, and the novels that for the games that I worked on weren't the story of the game. It was always a different story that was complementary to the game, expanding the game. It was a standalone, but if you combine both, you could have a different perspective. And I started really realizing that that entertainment companies in general were focusing on the medium, and I started wondering, why are they doing that? Why is a film studio, when what the value that they're creating, like let's say Lucasfilm, for example, what they're creating is a modern mythology. It's Star Wars, right? Whether it's a film or a comic book or a game, makes no difference. The worth, the product that they're creating is the mythology. It's not the medium. Mm-hmm. And something else came to mind. I realized that this is exactly what a lot of companies, the mistake that a lot of companies make. Like if you look at Kodak, for example, Kodak was the number one reference for everything to do with your memories, right? And in my opinion, when they were at their apex, Kodak was the memory company. It was the memories of your life. But because they were making most of their revenue through film, because they were developing your film, like back then, it's hard to imagine today, but people were literally putting their film in envelopes, shipping them to Kodak, and Kodak would send pictures back through the mail. And like over 80% of their revenue was from film. So when their own R&D department invented the digital chip, the digital camera, they're like, well, this is no use to us because it cuts us out of our main revenue. So they sold it off, right? Yeah. And then they ended up killing themselves. But if Kodak, rather than seeing themselves as a film company, they saw themselves as an image company or a memory company, they probably today would dominate the world of digital camera, of digital, like Photoshop would maybe be one of their products, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that this is the same mistake that sometimes entertainment companies do, is rather than viewing themselves as creators of mythologies, they see themselves through the lens of their medium, and the medium might not exist 20 years from now, but people will always want stories and characters. So this is where, after Unity, this had sort of grown in my mind, and I decided to leave Ubisoft and to start something on my own where I would maybe try to found a company that was based on those values, on this idea of creating myth. So this is where Reflector sort of came about.
I wanted to highlight a point that you mentioned that I think that you're probably going to get into, but I noticed, as I fully agree with what you're saying about this whole mythology and this whole brand, I've noticed that fans actually supplement a lot of those lost opportunities that brands don't take advantage of in some of those those companies that you mentioned. And it's a shame because you see all that ancillary stuff created after the fact.
You're absolutely right. And the other, and you're so right, because the other angle, like creating an IP and doing it like in a transmedia way with a lot of products and telling complementary stories, the fan base, that's the missing piece of the puzzle. Because if you're able to integrate the fan base and make them part of the creation process, make them part of the tissue, of the meta tissue of the IP, that I think is when you've essentially reached that transmedia nirvana. because I mean, look, and this is I've had discussions about this with a lot of people that that really believe in transmedia. Like you might know a guy called Tim Kring. He created Heroes, right? And that TV show was one of the first, if not the first TV show to really capitalize on social media and the modern world. They created a strong community, and they created a lot of like ARGs, alternate reality games. They created like content for the fans, like using the digital technology and digital social media of that day and age. And one thing in conversations that I've had with Tim, it was all about, well, he always called it like feeding the zombies. It's almost like as much content as you throw into the world, there's a horde of fans that are just gobbling it up, and you can't produce it fast enough to feed these fans, these rabid fans. So the way to do it is to find a way where fan creation becomes, you sort of crowdsource a lot of that creation, and you give the fans a voice so that the fans can also feed themselves, and it creates a sort of a positive feedback loop between the fans and the team that's actually creating the stuff.
Now that you took that and you brought that into Reflector, that whole ideology. So speak to me about, you started Reflector. How did you build that out? What was your first steps, and then how did you get to Unknown 9 and what you're doing now?
So the idea was really that it really initially started with that concept of transmedia. And I knew that a concept, an idea is great, but it only works if you have the right content behind it. The concept in itself is worthless if it doesn't have the right product or the right world to push behind it. So the first couple of years were a lot about trying to figure out what IP or what new worlds we could create that was compatible with this concept of transmedia, but that really resonated well with the zeitgeist of the moment. I truly believe that if you're going to create a world or a universe that sort of that lasts in time, it has to resonate with the spirit of the moment, with the zeitgeist of the time. I mean, Star Wars, when Lucas created it, it was the perfect timing, because it was all about this ragtag band of rebels that were outnumbered by this overpowered military. For him, it was a metaphor on the Vietnam War, right, and on the rebels that were the Viet Cong, I guess, against an imperialistic force coming in. But it also was extremely positive in a time where I think the U.S. especially needed a positive story. It wasn't about dark and depressing. There was hope. So I think that even if people don't know what's behind the inception of it, that energy and that force, no pun intended there, sorry, just
that's fine. Star Wars puns are always allowed.
But it sort of seeps through, and I think that fans like we capture that like an antenna, like a signal to an antenna. So the first part was like, what's the world of today? What are the big questions that are essentially fundamentally at the forefront of the human experience? And I started upon this side. One thing that came to mind is that we are evolving so fast as a species. We're getting to a point where our transformation as a species is accelerating to vertiginous speeds, and we are essentially becoming gods in most every sense of the word, in the sense that we're cracking the basic building blocks of the universe. And every week I'd read articles about a new way that we could annihilate ourselves as a species. I read this article on the news like a few years ago that they were thinking of creating these like miniature black holes to power cities. And I'm like, oh, that's great. The miniature black hole on the surface of the earth. Like, what could possibly go wrong? So the other ones were like, oh, we're going to invent this retrovirus that allows us to essentially add any genetic material to it, like a cure for something, so that we infect people with the cure. And that, then it mutates, and
Yeah.
then we have a zombie plague or something. So like, again, what can possibly go wrong with that? So I felt that we had attained the knowledge of gods, but our capacity to wield that knowledge, or collective wisdom, was actually dwindling. We went from a
Hmm.
society that used to venerate wisdom to a society that venerated knowledge, and now we live in a society that venerates data. But data is knowledge that hasn't been analyzed, and knowledge is wisdom that has been acquired through books, not through experience. So I felt that we're at a crux in our evolution, and we either transcend our inherent flaws as a species and transcend to that next level, or we really risk annihilating ourselves as a species. And that's where Unknown Nine came from. That concept, and like Lucas with Star Wars and the Vietnam War, people might never know this if nobody tells them, but the spirit of it is encoded in the DNA of the world. And so hopefully this is what people will seize on, and it'll create a world and characters that are very relevant to the realities of today.
I love that the thought that went into this, and I think it's highly relevant. And even just your point about the fact that we've sort of degraded how we make decisions as a society. I would even argue that many of our decisions are no longer even database. I think that we've taken a step back from that. But that's not the point of this. That's not the point of this podcast.
I agree.
I think. So as you build out Unknown Nine, where are you at in its creation now? Just to sort of tee it up for everyone, because I saw the trailer, and the trailer really just walks through. It's a beautiful trailer. Doors open. It shows a plum tree. It speaks about, I guess, a god like leaving a portal open, and that's just like the teaser to cue up the story. And I didn't know where you were in the actual development or the release. So where are you at right now?
So we're working hard on what we call our first story cycle. And a
Okay.
story cycle is something that we came up with, but it's the equivalent. Think of it, it is to Transmedia what a season is to a television show.
Okay.
So you have to wrap it up into digestible bites so that people can actually start and end following it and know where to start the next cycle. So if it's just like a big sprawl, then it might be scary or difficult to the uninitiated. But if you break it up into narrative cycles, so we're working on our first story cycle. Our first story cycle is 3 novels. We've published the first one. We've kept it pretty hush hush because I'll get into that later about our announcement that because of COVID, we sort of had to cancel it. But the first novel is out. The second one is finished. I think it's finalizing the editor this week or next week. The third one is already outlined. We are working on a comic book series of 12 issues, which is about the size of Watchmen, if you want a comparison. We're working on a podcast. It's 3 seasons. The first one is completely recorded. We're finalizing the writing on season 2. Season 3 is outlined, and we're going to start recording season 2 pretty soon. COVID again, as soon as it dies out a little bit. We're working on this ambitious digital platform where you can consume all these products. You don't need to consume them on the platform. You can buy the book on Amazon or whatever, but it's a one place where you can actually delve into the world, and the platform itself is an interactive experience. So you can be part. Remember, we talked about like the fan base being part of it. This is it. Like you're part of the world. You're part of you're a character in the world, and you can actually delve into it and explore, find secrets, like follow us down the rabbit hole. It's a very ambitious initiative. And we're also working on a AAA video game, and we're also developing a film. And we have loads of digital series that also are embedded in our platform that you can consume on the platform.
And I guess a question about like how you built out this narrative and how you went through these sprints, for lack of a better term, because I'm uneducated on this. So as you go through different sprints and you release these different products, what's the strategy behind getting somebody engaged and involved and in love with this story world? Why the book first? Why not the video game? Why not a movie first?
Mm-hmm. It really depends on the. It's a very good question. It really depends on the on the story world, or even on the specific story cycle. So right now, like the way that we were supposed to launch it was not just the novel. It was supposed to be a lot of stuff in tandem, but then COVID hit. So the way we do it is that you don't need to have read the book to enjoy the film or the game, or each product is standalone, and each product is treated like it's an acquisition channel. So we create the novel not like a spin-off of something else. We create the novel as though we were only making a novel. It's for us, it's a priority. It's like our principal product. And we create the podcast with the same philosophy, every product. So if somebody just likes books and likes that genre of book, they'll find that book really good. And the book is actually like rated, I think 4.20 something on Goodreads, which is very high for Goodreads, because we treated it like this is it. This is not like an ancillary that we just write, like give to somebody and just write something fast so that we can capitalize on whatever our main product is. It's treated like a main product. So the way that everybody will get into the IP, into the world, is different. If you're a novel reader and you read it and you like it, and then you learn that there's a podcast, you might give it a try, and then you might get hooked on it, and then you might hear about a video game, and then that's your own journey. My journey might be more, I love comic books, and I'm enjoying the comic book, and then I might give the film a try because, hey, some of the characters are in the film. But if we go watch the film together, and I've played the game and read the comic book, and you've read the book and listened to the podcasts, you're going to have a different perspective than I do. And so when the film is going to start, and we're like, oh shit, I know what this character is, and you're like, but it's not so clear cut, because that character also did this, and then it gets us into a debate, and it encourages conversations, talks, like forums, like posts. So that's how you sort of encourage that building of that community, by giving people different perspectives and allowing them to connect the dots. But because everybody has a different perspective, they're going to see connections that others aren't. And so that, again, it encourages all of that, like hopefully all of that cool chemistry on social media, and community building and community growth.
And is this, I want to understand how you were planning to take this to market in COVID and state of the industry. But before that, I just wanted to understand, is this something that is entirely proprietary? Is there anyone else doing anything like this? Or is the concept of a story world, purposefully building a story world, is that innovative in this industry?
It is pretty innovative, and a lot of people have toyed around with Transmedia, and like the concept of Transmedia isn't new, but the specific way that Reflector is doing it is pretty new. And any company that says that they're doing Transmedia, oftentimes, and I don't want to generalize, but often when you have a conversation, after 5 minutes, you go, aha. And usually the haha is when they start talking about their tentpole, right? Well, it really is a TV show, but we're creating all of this stuff too. Yeah. So it's okay to have, like, Reflector. We know what our revenue driver is. We know which one is the product that we are hoping to make money out of, or principal money driver. But there's a difference between the money driver, the revenue driver, and the philosophy and the deployment and what you're keeping your eye on. So most companies, the thing is, even if a company has all of these different divisions, let's say they have comic books, they have games, they have films, TV shows, like all of it, but they're all siloed. And on top of each silo is somebody that runs that division or that company. And that person will find it difficult to swallow if, let's say I'm the company X and I run the game division, and I'm told, well, your game is a loss leader because the TV show is going to make a lot of money. I'm going to say, well, why will I have red on my bottom line so that the person that runs the other division can reap all the profits? I'm penalized for this. So it becomes difficult to collaborate. Whereas Reflector, the business model is on the IP itself. It's on the world. So it's much easier then to have loss leaders, because your ultimate valuation is on the world itself that you're building. As long as the world expands, it grows, the fan base grows, as long as you're making money, it's okay to sacrifice certain products as loss leaders, because ultimately, even if they're not making any direct money, they're increasing the value of the IP of the world.
Yeah, no,
That's
that makes
really
a ton of sense.
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead. I
No,
didn't mean to interrupt.
no. That's what's really different about specifically about our business model.
So walk me through how you were going to take it to market. Because I read an article on South by Southwest,
Mhm.
and how you were planning on creating this I guess this event at South by Southwest, and I thought that was a great microcosm of how you can build out so many different facets to even a launch. So it's like, everything you do seems to be multifaceted and have so many different angles. And then also just, I guess, the state of the industry, what you are planning on doing that you're allowed to talk about in terms of taking to market, because obviously COVID and whatnot.
Mhm. Yeah, so I can tell you how we were going to do it, and now how we're sort of like, without revealing too much, but I'll explain how
Mm-hmm.
we sort of reacted, and how we've reimagined our to market strategy. So originally, we were going to announce Unknown 9, and we were going to actually release a lot of products at South by Southwest. And about a week before, a little less than a week before it opened, we actually had people on the ground there preparing. It was canceled because of COVID. Now, the way we were going to do it is that one of the products that I didn't talk about was live events. And I didn't talk about it earlier for obvious reasons, because right now it's very difficult to think about live events when people are still wearing masks and people are still afraid for their lives. So our priority has to be, first and foremost, people's safety. But back then, we really thought, and I still believe, like once hopefully COVID is going to be resolved, eventually with the vaccine or medication, and I think humans are social animals. It would be a shame that we can't go back to actual social gatherings, because I think that's part of what our species is about. So we were going to do probably one of the most ambitious live events ever attempted at South by Southwest. So we were, first of all, we were opening, doing the official opening party for the interactive division of South by Southwest. And then we were inviting people to this event that was happening in the streets of Austin. This huge architectural dig, and people were going to be part of it, and we were going to show what was discovered under the city. And it was this very, very ambitious, very cool event that people could take part in. And this would lead to our announcement, and we were going to announce that we were going to launch a bunch of products, a bunch of the ones that I spoke about earlier today. And then it was going to be also the launch of our platform, and then the platform would evolve gradually as fans sort of joining. We would go to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then as new products were released, we would expand that experience in the platform and the narrative, the ongoing narrative. So obviously we had to rethink everything, and we had to react very quickly when stuff started happening very, very quickly, and the team and I, we sort of pulled back, and we started thinking about, like, okay, like, this thing is here to stay for a while, this COVID. So how do we start envisioning a launch that takes into account the new reality that we live in? So we essentially fell back on something that was a lot more digital in nature. So we're still going to use an event to amplify our message. We're still going to use even if it is a digital event. But then our launch and our strategy, at least for the moment, is going to be wholly digital, and we're going to avoid anything that's live. Just again, for safety. But the good thing about this is that people are actually never going to get to see version 1 of the platform, because we kept working on it since South by Southwest, and when we actually launched the initial version, it's not going to look like what was supposed to be the initial version. It's already going to look like something much, much more ambitious. So I'm at least excited about that part. I think fans are, it's going to be much more of a cool experience to see something that is already a game changer, rather than having, the first portion and having see that game changing aspect be integrated later on.
So so do you have do you have public timelines for as things roll out, or is it still sort of being, in the works under wraps right now?
It's still under wraps, but
okay.
what I tell you is that it's ended this year.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a big announcement.
Okay. Very cool. No, I'm more asking for myself now, because the more you tell me about this, the more I'm getting excited about it. It's really, it's a very, very cool concept. And now once you understand the thought behind it, I think you appreciate it even more, as opposed to just another piece of IP.
Yep.
I do have I have like some rapid fire questions that I like to ask, just to bring out insights that you've learned over your career. Before I pivot, is there anything that I don't or that I didn't ask that I should have about Unknown 9, Reflector, anything you're dealing with right now that you just wanted to speak about?
Nope.
Okay. So we did a good job. All right, good. All right. And I just like to ask some of these questions to tee up your professional experience, because you've had such an incredible career. So what would be some advice that you would give someone who was looking to go into a career in creative?
The one thing I would say is to always follow your instincts, because a lot of the decisions that I made in my career might not have been the logical ones at the moment, but they were the ones that my heart was indicating. And I think that it's funny how when you do that, things seem to line up, and things seem to like the opportunities that will, and also sometimes a road that might seem like a riskier one might be the one that leads you to something where you never would have, like I never thought I would at one point find myself as the creative director of such a big franchise as Assassin's Creed. And I certainly didn't seek it out, because I mean, one could certainly try to seek it out, but how does one get there, right? So it happened completely out of the blue. And I wouldn't even have imagined that like 2 years prior. Like if somebody had told me you're gonna leave that franchise at one point, I would be like, yeah, really, how? So I think by following your instincts and staying true to that, I think that the world has a way of sort of guiding you around those currents and leading you towards calm waters.
Very good. In terms of what you're curious about, or what you're researching, or you're excited about in creative and IP creation, is what are you looking into now that's going to be the future of your industry?
Mm-hmm. That's a super good question, and it's I mean, it's such a it's in such a state of flux right now. Every industry, like the creative industry especially, is in such a state of flux that it's difficult to see even like what mediums are going to be popular. Like, look, I'll give you an example. I love film, and I'm a huge film fan. I have a huge film library. But I've noticed lately that I didn't even remember last time I saw a film, because I'm always watching series. And now when I watch a film, I have a sense that something's missing, that it's almost like I'm so used to the format. And this happens so fast, but it simultaneously in such a gradual way that I never realized that my perception flipped on a medium that has been something that I've loved for my entire life. So that's the speed at which things are shifting right now. So I think that what I would think is, I think the paradigm has to shift from the medium to what the value is that you're bringing the universe. And I think that's what Reflector is trying to do. And we're doing it one way, but I'm certain that there's 100 other ways of doing it that might be as good or better. But I think that the important thing is that I think that people have to be open-minded about like questioning the paradigms that we've essentially inherited from a very different world. These companies were created in the 20th century, right? These big companies. The world was very different. Mm-hmm. And the other part of your question, like how do I and where do I get my inspiration? I really believe that creativity. I don't think that creativity is some sort of like weird voodoo that happens. I think that creativity is a direct result of what you pump into your brain. And I think that the more diverse subject matters you insert into your brain, the more original ideas are going to be spewed out by your brain. So I read about science. I love fiction, nonfiction. I'm interested by everything. I think the world is a fantastic, interesting place full of magic. And I think that if people choose to see it that way, they're going to come up with magic, and they're going to come up with stuff that is out of the box and it feels fresh. I think that and this goes back to also your question that you asked me about, like the advice. I think this is also a really, like, from my perspective anyways, is it's very easy to start seeing the world through pessimistic or negative eyes. But I think that seeing the magic in everything is what brings about change and what brings about quality. So as a creative, you always have to remember to see the world through those eyes, the eyes of a child,
Yeah, I like that answer a lot. And that actually tees up, I'm curious about where you go to learn and sort of stay on top of what's happening. Are there specific resources, or is it just a diverse set?
So when I've never been one for a lot of conferences and stuff like that. It's just like it's not really my personality. I love reading, and I think that also having an amazing team of people that are smart and that have varying points of view, putting them in a room, if everybody is always respectful, varying points of view. And this is something that, the world today is this is slowly dying away, right? People now, it's more of a tendency of surrounding yourself with people that think exactly like you. But I think this is a mistake, because you just keep shrinking your circles, your perspective more and
like
more.
An echo chamber of.
Yes. Yeah. Whereas it's okay to have varying opinions, as long as nobody's harming anybody, but having varying, and it's okay for people that have varying opinions to have that opinion, right? I think it's what makes, it's also a check and balance for not only for creatives, but for the world in general, to make sure that we never go down a road where everybody's sort of convinced of something. So I think that, like, allowing that, surrounding yourself with smart people of varying opinions, talented people, that also is something that keeps that creative spark and that originality alive.
Is there any books in particular, like actual titles that you've read that you really like?
There's many. I mean,
I know. Look, I see behind you.
Yeah. Look, Leonardo da Vinci biography. It's an amazing bio. Like, and I'm not a huge fan of biographies, but some of them are very well. Like, I really like Walter Isaacson. Yeah. If you want books on writing, there's many that are cool. I love, like, I'm not a fan of Stephen King, but Stephen King on writing is such an amazing book. I think it's, in my opinion, the best book on writing that I've ever read. And a lot of people say, well, it doesn't talk about writing, but it does. It so does. So, Sapiens is an amazing book that everybody should read. It's about humans, about our journey. What else is interesting? I love history. Obviously, the Assassin's Creed part of my career sort of gives that up. But I love history, like from the ancient world to classic history, medieval to the Renaissance. I think that history is, if people read more about history, I think we would avoid a lot more problems, because humans are humans. We're the same people that existed 2,000, 6,000 years back. Very little has changed except our environment. So we do make the same mistakes. And, knowing and reading about history is an amazing way to at least avoid the ones that we've made in the past, and just focus on trying to avoid the ones that we haven't yet made.
Very good. And then I actually, I never asked you if you have a hard stop. I hope not, because I've just been going, because there's so much, there's a lot of stuff coming out of this. I only have a couple more quick questions, if you don't mind. What's a lesson that you would tell your younger self?
That's a really good one. I would probably tell myself to, like, I would probably tell myself not to take things, to treat life more like a game, in the sense that I tend to be somebody that is very, very emotional, uh, whether it's about what I create, whether it's about like things, and I think that this goes with the creative aspect of myself, right? I think creative people are inherently people that are connected to their emotions, because this is what you're channeling, when you're writing, or it's almost like self-hypnosis, where your brain is sort of just channeling pure thought and emotion. But I think that when I look to somebody like my wife, for example, where she's the eternal optimist, for her, I mean, life is something that essentially that you need. It's almost like a river that you follow, and you just need to be careful not to hit the sides, but you just go with the flow. And if you're careful to avoid the obstacles, it'll take you to where you need to be. Whereas a lot of times, especially younger, you tend to want to fight the current. And I think that's a mistake. I think that like channeling that like life energy and like taking things as they come and just being zen about it, I think is probably something that a lot of creatives deal with. And it's not only it's something that I would tell my younger self, but it's something that I would tell any person that is in the creative industry. Yeah.
No, it's very good. And then what does success mean to you?
For me, success is all about a quest for excellence. And excellence is not something that you ever get to. It's something that, if you're lucky, sometimes you sort of you almost like you lightly touch, right? And I think it's something that you do your entire life. Getting to create something that is excellent, I think it's a life quest, right? And success for me is sometimes maybe just glancing at it, and or just touching it lightly, and being able to say that, I was able to do that, right? I think that today we very often get lost in the immediacy of success being like monetary, or it being, like I don't know, like I think that for me, success is not a goal. It's a moving target. It's
a lifestyle. It's like omnipresent, just like
yes.
so you're always, because I understand what you're saying. You're saying, we get too focused on these tangible milestones, like, I make this much money, or I did this, or I got but it's temporary, right? Like, you can't have that, because then what happens when you hit that and you're on the other side of that, right? That's an issue if you envision success that way. I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think it's what you were mentioning.
Yeah. And look, if your mindset is about that journey, it's about that finding that excellence, especially as a creative, right? Then you're never done, and you're happy about having, oh man, like this part right here, wow, like I'm so proud of that, because I sort of like I touched upon that excellence, right? But next time I'll do better, and maybe it'll be, but that it's something that you'll never fully attain. But it's great, because those rewards that you get when you sort of like lightly touch upon that success, that excellence, are what drives you to the next one.
And lastly, the most important, where can the listeners connect with you online and find out more?
So they can go to unknown9.com, they can go to reflector.com, they can go to Instagram, they can go to Twitter, and I'm there, Reflector is there. So
that's all for today. Thanks again for joining me on another episode of the Success Story Podcast. You can download or stream this podcast wherever podcasts are available, including iTunes, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and many others. You can also watch this podcast on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe and share this podcast with your friends, family, coworkers, and peers. Please leave us a rating on iTunes. It takes about 30 seconds, as it allows other people to find our podcast and lets our amazing guests reach even more people with their message. And remember, any rating is fine as long as it contains 5 stars. I'm Scott Clary from the Success Story Podcast, signing off.